It was a corrections officer who leaked this video.
Video leaked from an officer inside contradicts what officials told the press.
Mitchell arrived at the hospital unresponsive, pulseless, and cold to the touch. He had a core temperature of 72 degrees.
This is not just something that just goes on without the sheriff's knowledge.
How high do you think this goes?
It seems to pretty much implicate the command staff and the jail administration.
Bailey Clark Gainey pleading guilty to conspiracy against the rights today in federal court connected to the treatment of inmate Tony Mitchell. He could be sentenced up to life in prison.
She's the second former Walker County jailer to sign a plea deal. Agreed to plead guilty for her role in the case.
Last week, two former jailers, Joshua Jones and Karen Kelly, agreed to separate plea agreements admitting to participating in the neglect of inmate Tony Mitchell.
Former Walker County Correctional Officer Megan Johnson is the latest person to agree to plead guilty in connection with inmate Tony Mitchell's death.
Joshua Jones fully accepted his role in the death of Tony Mitchell, entering that guilty plea less than an hour ago.
6 people who worked at the Walker County Jail are charged in this federal case, and more arrests are expected.
Daniel Wires was a member of the medical team at the Walker County Jail. He will plead guilty to deprivation of rights under the color of law.
7 others are also charged in the case.
8 people who were working in the jail when Mitchell died last year have agreed to plead guilty to charges related to the case.
This was not what they were trying to lead us to believe it was. It's like they didn't even see him as a human being. They had no sense of urgency, and he's clearly not okay. It's like, why was he 72 degrees? Like, why was he pulseless? Like, that doesn't just happen.
33-year-old Anthony Mitchell was pronounced at 1:15 in the afternoon on January 26, 2023 in the emergency room of Walker County Baptist Hospital. Tony would arrive at the hospital with a core body temperature of 72 degrees, having just spent 2 weeks in the Walker County Jail. The doctor, who worked for 3.5 hours to try and save Tony's life, would write this in his report. I am not sure what circumstances the patient was held in incarceration, but it is difficult to understand a rectal temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 22 degrees centigrade, while someone is incarcerated in jail. The cause of hypothermia is not clear. I do not know if he could have been exposed to a cold environment. I do believe hypothermia was the ultimate cause of death.
So far, 9 corrections officers and healthcare workers have made plea deals and pled guilty to charges relating to the horrendous treatment of Tony Mitchell during his incarceration at the Walker County Jail. And most of these people are facing up to a year in jail. How did a 33-year-old man who was being held pre-trial, not convicted of any crime, wind up losing his life to hypothermia while being incarcerated in the county jail?
Growing up, Tony Mitchell and his father were close. Sadly, as an adult, Tony would slip into drug addiction and also suffered from some pretty severe mental health issues. Tragically, in late 2022, Tony's dad died. This sent an already fragile Tony on a downward spiral that he would sadly never make his way out of. For the next couple months, Tony would slip deeper into addiction, and his mental health would continue to deteriorate. Living alone, his family wouldn't see him for months, and when they did, they were shocked.
6'3" Tony lost 100 pounds, and his delusional thinking was getting worse. Fast forward to January 12, 2023. Tony and one of his cousins got together.
Tony's cousin would later say he was completely out of his mind, and he was very scared for him. By this time, Tony was unrecognizable, and the things he was saying were not making any sense. And this terrified his cousin. Feeling like he had no choice, Tony's cousin would first call the Walker County Sheriffs to see if they could help. When that didn't work, he called 911. Now, the cousin told the dispatcher what was happening and that Tony really needed an ambulance and to go to the hospital. Now, the Walker County Sheriffs would arrive to Tony's home, and they state Tony was standing on his front lawn and had fired a shot at them before he ran into the woods behind his home.
The sheriff's deputies would call shots fired over the radio. That would catch the attention of a SWAT team that just so happened to be training nearby. Not only would the SWAT team respond, so did their aviation unit and a canine unit from an outside agency. Oh, and Sheriff Nick Smith would also respond, along with his publicist officer, T.J. Armstrong.
While they searched for Tony, a warrant was signed by a judge for Tony's arrest, and this was for attempted murder for firing at the police. Walker County's aviation unit would pinpoint Tony's location. He would later be arrested without incident. And this is where that famous picture of Tony comes in. It was taken by T.J. Armstrong, and it's with Tony with that black on his face. Law enforcement is stating it's from black paint that Tony had put on his face. Others speculate it's from a flashbang used by the SWAT team. And that photo that everybody knows of Tony from this case was posted on Walker County's Facebook page within hours of his arrest. This upset a lot of people in the county.
Now, Tony's mother and cousin were on scene while he was getting arrested. And Public Information Officer T.J. Armstrong assured Tony's family that he was going to get the medical and psychiatric help he desperately needed while he was in jail. And this was his first lie. Instead of going to the hospital, Tony was taken straight to Walker County Jail, where he was stripped naked and put in holding cell BK5, otherwise known as the drunk tank.
This cement cell had nothing. Only a drain in the floor to use the bathroom. No sink, no bed, no mat, and this is where Tony would spend the next 2 weeks. The next thing we know about Tony was on January 15th. He was taken out of his cell by Corrections Officer Braxton Key and tased. And this was done right in front of his supervisor, Jody Tidwell, who did nothing. Now, during this tasing, Tony's false teeth would fall out, and they were taken from him. The next time those teeth were seen was when Tony's property was turned over to his mother after he died.
Now remember, Tony was already malnourished when he got there. And now without his teeth, he was unable to eat. Over the 2 weeks Tony was in jail, guards and medical staff conspired to keep Tony in the most horrendous conditions possible.
Leaving Tony naked in that same cement holding cell, which is not made to house people for extended periods of time. Not only did they leave Tony in his own filth, but they pumped cold air into the cell. And we now know, based on the lawsuit, the last 3 days Tony was in jail, he was not given any water. Now, fast forward 10 days to January 25th. Corrections Officer Karen Kelly, who's also a supervisor at the jail, is going to be one of the last people to talk to Tony alive. She was off for a couple days after January 25th, and when she returned back to work, she was horrified to find out that Tony had died.
Between the night on January 25th and 4 a.m. on January 26th, Tony's body temperature had rapidly dropped. And how did this happen? It's believed Tony was subjected to frigid temperatures during the night shift, while he lay on the floor of the cement cell naked.
The guards working that night were Supervisor Denzel Mitchell, Bailey Gainey, Braxton Key, Catherine Klingon, and Jacob Smith. Guards Braxton Key and Jacob Smith would then state on the morning of January 26th, around 4 a.m., they looked at Tony in his cell and he wasn't doing good. It's at this point Tony's condition began rapidly declining.
But guards and medical staff would wait another 5 hours before deciding Tony needed to go to the hospital. Instead of calling an ambulance, they clothed Tony for the first time since he was at the jail and drug him out to the Sally Port. They would then throw Tony in the back of a sheriff's patrol car before driving him to the hospital. It's important to note, Tony was already completely unresponsive by the time he got to the hospital.
The ER doctor would later state when Tony got to the hospital, he was breathing 2 to 4 times a minute. His heart was not beating, and his pupils were fixed and dilated. Tony was also cold to the touch, and he was completely unresponsive. The guards that brought Tony to the hospital were not forthcoming with information on why Tony was in this condition. And the ER doctor would end up trying to resuscitate Tony for almost 3.5 hours.
T.J. Armstrong called Tony's mother to come to the hospital, and once she got there, she would have a discussion with the doctor. The decision was made to stop resuscitation. Tony was pronounced at 1:15 in the afternoon on January 26, 2023. Within days of Tony's death, T.J. Armstrong and the Walker County Sheriff's Department were making false statements to the public about what actually happened.
They would also tell Tony's family that he was alert when he went to the hospital, and while there, he sat up and had a heart attack, and that's why he lost his life. But we know that's not true based on the ER doctor's findings alone, which stated when Tony got to the ER, his body temperature was 72 degrees and he died of hypothermia.
Now, remember Karen Kelly, the corrections officer's supervisor? When she got back from vacation days later and saw that Tony had died, she knew the narrative being fed to the public wasn't true. So she decided to record security footage showing Tony being completely unresponsive when he left for the hospital. She made a point to share it with colleagues at other police departments and with her supervisor. And that video would end up getting back to Tony's sister, and she saw she was being lied to.
Now, of course, the media would end up getting a hold of this tape, and it blew the case wide open. The Walker County Sheriff's Department would end up finding out it was CO Karen Kelly who leaked that security footage, and they fired her.
The estate for Tony Mitchell has filed a federal lawsuit against Sheriff Nick Smith and against the guards and medical staff who conspired to deprive Tony of things like water, a blanket, or his teeth so he could eat. And they all did this for retribution because Tony allegedly shot at a deputy.
But you know what they haven't released? The body cam footage from the day Tony was arrested. You want to know what else they haven't released? The other security footage from inside the jail. So we would know exactly what happened to Tony on the night shift. Here's what we do know. So far, 9 C.O.s and healthcare professionals have pled guilty for what they did to Tony. They're all out on bail, and they're all also facing pretty much less than a year in jail. Justice.
But you know who hasn't faced any accountability? The sheriff in charge of the jail. He's still working there in charge. As a matter of fact, he tried to claim absolute immunity in the federal lawsuit. But he's still at the top of the list.
And this isn't over, because Tony's death was in fact ruled a homicide, and there are a lot more people who still need to face accountability for what they did to Tony in this case. If you're looking for a good place to stay up to date on the Tony Mitchell case, check out the Secret True Crime Podcast. Out of all the places we researched, they seem to have the most up-to-date and detailed information on Tony Mitchell's case. Our channel is Dark Times with Nico Inside. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching.
If you liked the video, make sure to give us a like and subscribe.
We will catch you in the next video.